governor of Banda for 4 years from 1623. And that's a picture of the Dovekin. The Dutch have once again made a replica of the Dovekin, and that's known as the little dove, little bird. And it's a beautiful little ship. It's a tiny little thing. You wouldn't think that you could have many people on board, but it's been to Australia a couple of times, and if you get to see it, I recommend having a look over it. Dirk Hartog landed at a place. He was another VOC captain, and he landed in a place that's now called Dirk Hartog Island, which is part of Shark Bay, near Monkey Mia. So, Monkey Mia, Shark Bay, what's it famous for? Anyone? Dolphins, yeah. Who knew? And he when he landed there, he thought he would leave a remembrance. So he scratched out an inscription on a plate, on a steel plate, and left it nailed to a beam, to a piece of wood on the island. And the plate featured the date that they arrived, the name of the ship, and also the supercargo, Giles Mibus. He was the senior merchant, VOC merchant, aboard the ship at that time. Now that could have stayed there forever and ever and never have been found, but very, very coincidentally, 80 years later, another Dutch VOC captain, Willem de Vlamingh, actually pulled into the same bay. And I suppose if Dirk Hartog was Humphrey Bogart, he might say something along the lines of all the bays in all the world, you happen to come into mine. But he was walking along the beach and actually tripped over this plate that was half covered by sand. And he took it back to, Hartog was long dead by this stage. He took the plate back to Batavia, and it's now on exhibition at a maritime museum in Amsterdam. It has been out to Australia on a couple of occasions for very, very special events, and the Australian government has tried to purchase it many, many times, but the Dutch refused to give it up. And who can blame them? Another navigator, VOC navigator, Jan Carstens, aboard his vessel, the Arnhem, in 1623, landed on where we now call Arnhem Land. He named the area after his boat. He thought the area was very marshy and swampy. He'd actually landed on mud flats in a mangrove area of the Gulf of Carpentaria, but that area is now known as Arnhem Land in Australia, and people often talk about Arnhem Land, which was basically Crocodile Dundee country. He also named the Gulf of Carpentaria after the VOC governor at the time, Peter Carpenter. Francois Thyssen mapped southern Australia. He cruised along the roaring 40s of the southern Indian Ocean until he came to Cape Lewin in Western Australia, what we now know as Western Australia. And then he mapped 15, he was given permissions by the VOC officer on board the vessel at the time, Peter Newts, to map the area. So they mapped 1,500 kilometres of the South Australian, Western Australian and South Australian coastline, all the way to what we now know as Ceduna as Western Australia before turning around. He actually named the whole location in honour of Newts. He called it Newts Land, but that was never ratified. And in the end, we're left today with the Newts Archipelago, which is made up of a few islands off South Australia. And we come to Abel Tasman. Now, this is an interesting guy. He was sent by the VOC to find out more about this great southern land, and he cruised under the bottom of Australia, missed the whole continent of Australia completely, and then bumped into what he'd termed Van Diemen's Land, which we now know as Tasmania. So it was really an accidental sort of thing to do. He mapped some of Tasmania, and then he got a bit, he must have got a bit bored or something, and he tried to head north back to Batavia, but was blown off course, and he was blown eastward, and then he bumped into New Zealand. He decided to map this new land. He actually named it Staten Land because he thought it was an area off the Staten Archipelago in Argentina. So he was a long way off course. He was 7,500 nautical miles off course. So there's navigators and there's navigators. And when he started mapping New Zealand, and he got to a place into a bay which is very fertile sort of area, and the local Maori attacked his ship, and 10 of his men were actually killed. And he called that area Murderers Bay, and then decided that's enough, I'm going home, and he set sail for Batavia. Now, when he got back, the VOC weren't very happy with him at all. Why hadn't you stayed? Why hadn't you actually mapped these areas for us and found out whether they were suitable for trading? So he was actually carpeted by the VOC. We think of him as a national hero in Australia and New Zealand, but the VOC didn't think very much of him at all. And in a report, they said that they should have sent a more persistent explorer along the journey. He was actually given more menial jobs to do after that. And in November 1649, he was charged by the VOC with hanging one of his crew without any form of trial. He was demoted from captain, and he was ordered to pay restitution to the family of the victim. And then again, he was reinstated 2 or 3 years later to the position of captain. But he, as I said, he was really an accidental navigator at the time. So in the mid 1600s, the VOC were the most profitable, the most powerful, the most wonderful organisation in the world. Politically, they were so strong, but it didn't take long for things to start to decline. By 1680, there was a lot more competition in the world. The British Navy had got a lot stronger, and they were moving in on the territory. The VOC were fighting wars in a lot of places. They were fighting wars in Ceylon, they were fighting wars in India, in South Africa, all over their territories, and they were trying to quell rebellions in all these areas. People were finding out that there were better deals to be had than just dealing with the VOC, and they were trying to take advantage of those, and the VOC were trying to put them down. They also had trouble with the Napoleonic Wars happening in Europe, where the Dutch were fighting just about everyone. Alliances kept on changing. They were at war with the French, they were at war with the British, and of course at war with the Spanish. So the Dutch economy was suffering by this stage as well. There was also a lot of corruption and incompetence within the VOC by this stage. Being a member on the board of directors, or the Heron 17, was thought to be a plum position. You could make a lot of money by being on that board, and it became a political decision rather than on a decision made on merit who got to be on that board. All the different states wanted their people on that board, and so there was incompetent people going onto the board. And there was also a lot of turnover within the VOC itself. Because the main trading area was so far away from Europe, a lot of the people had had enough and wanted to go back, so there was often large amounts of turnover. So it didn't take long for the organisation to start to decline. And it all came to a head in 1780 when the Dutch lost the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War against the British. And by this stage, the British had become very strong, and they were coming right into the territory and ousting the Dutch from several territories within this area. And then on the 31st of December 1799, the Charter, which had originally been for 21 years but had been renewed at every occasion since then, was up for renewal again. The VOC by this stage owed millions and millions of guilders. They were in debt, and the Dutch government actually nationalised the organisation and took over that debt themselves. And it took them several decades to pay off that debt of the VOC. So the decline was, even though the organisation lasted for 200 years, the decline had been happening for over 120 years of that 200 years. There was talk of resurrecting the VOC at some stage, but in 1806 Napoleon Bonaparte appointed his brother Louis to the throne of the Netherlands when he had conquered the Dutch, and having seen the power of the VOC, Louis Bonaparte completely broke up the organisation for all time. And then in 1811 the British under Raffles came and attacked and invaded what we know now as Indonesia. A few years later, in 1816, there was negotiation between the Dutch and the British, and which sees the present borders that we've got now for the country of Indonesia and the country of Malaysia. So the Dutch came in and they colonised. The agreement was that with the British that they would colonise Indonesia, and the British would colonise Malaysia, and that's how it stood for until till 1942, when the Japanese came through and ousted both of those powers from the area. After the Second World War, the Dutch tried to come back into Indonesia, but the independence movement of Indonesia was strong by this stage, and they rebelled, and the Dutch finally relented and gave independence to Indonesia in 1949. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd just like to say that I've really enjoyed giving these presentations. This is actually the first time I've ever done anything like this, the first time I've done anything like this on a cruise ship, or the first time I've done any public speaking whatsoever. If you are ever suffering from constipation, a very natural cure is public speaking, I can tell you. I was pretty nervous about doing this sort of thing and up front. Lee was even more nervous about it though. You might not have noticed, but for the first two talks, she was sitting over next to the abandoned ship alarm. So if things had gone badly, we might have all been bobbing around in the south trying to see together. So that, even after the first talk, she said, I thought that went really well, and she was pretty happy. But even with the second talk, she still brought her life vest with her, just in case. So a lot of confidence. But I really would like to thank Celebrity for the opportunity to be able to do these talks, and to Lee for her support, of course, and couldn't have done it without her. And I'd just like to thank you for coming along and supporting. It's been some great feedback. A lot of people have asked whether we're going to record our next adventure and our travels aboard the MV Sunshine Coast, and we have decided that we will do a blog, and if you want some details about the contact details, Lee will be out in the foyer any minute now. Yeah. Just can't get good help, can you? If you want those contact details, just see Lee, and she'll give you those details. So once again, I'd just like to thank you all very, very much. I've had a great time. Safe journey back to where you're home, wherever that is, and see us again sometime. Thank you.